I don't have any back. Hey everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of Competency Corner Live. My name is Sarah Beckett, and I'm the host of this monthly Q&A show. I am very excited to be able to introduce today our special guest, Kelsea Beadman. Welcome, Kelsea.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Kelsea is a consultant here with HRSG. She does a lot of our work, especially in the training area. So, it's great to be able to get her expertise to come and answer all of your questions today.
Thanks.
And thank you to all the registrants. We had so many people sign up for today's session and submit questions, so that was really, really awesome. And we will get to those in just a moment. For those of you who know Ottawa, Ottawa is a technology hub in North America. Some people like to call it, the Silicon Valley of the North. And Kelsea was actually with one of our team today, delivering some training to, a little known startup that you may have heard of, Shopify. So how'd the training go today?
Went really well. We had some really great conversations around how do you move from that startup phase to that growth phase. So if you're expanding really rapidly, how do you keep that company culture and that essence of what your culture is alive as you start to grow and increase? So some really great thoughts and conversations.
Awesome. Sounds like they're a great candidate for using competencies for sure.
Exactly.
Awesome. So we are going to jump right into our questions. We only have 20 minutes and we have a lot of questions to get through. We will do our best to get through as many as possible, but for those who did submit and we don't get to them, we will make sure to get you answers sent to you via email after the fact. So let's dive right in. So Kelsea, our first question comes to us from Kenda. This is a question we get all the time. Typically, how many competencies should be assigned to a job?
So yeah, very, very typical question. So short answer, between 9 and 12 competencies is a great range. Longer answer, it really depends on your architecture. So whether you want to include core, job, family, leadership, job-specific competencies, what do you want to use the competencies for, how big your organization is, all things to take into consideration, as well as how easy they are to use. If you think about, if you have 25 competencies in a profile, if you could think about having to answer 25 questions about your performance or 25 interview questions, it's kind of lengthy and hard to manage. So.
Wonderful. And the good thing, the Kenda who asked this question, she said, we were always told between 9 and 12. So good job, Kenda. You got the right information there. So our next question comes to us from Asya. So how can we use competencies in recruitment and staffing?
So great question again. If you think about how you apply competencies for recruitment and staffing, the first sort of phase of that is really identifying what the needs are for the role. So if you want to bring somebody into the organization, what skills do you want them to have as soon as they come in the door? So there's not that big lag of training as soon as they get in. Posting those types of things in your job ads, you can include the competency title, definition, sort of a brief overview of what you would expect in the job ad. It helps people who are qualified apply. People who may not have those competencies might self-screen out. And then in terms of the actual selection process, so whether it's a knowledge test, reference check, interview, so competencies really lend themselves well to behavioral-based interview questions. So being able to use them at the point of interview and then flip those around for reference checks, make sure you get the right people in the door.
Yeah, that sounds great. And one of the hot topics now really is around hiring for culture fit.
Yeah.
And I think some of the stuff that we've definitely seen coming out of the research and with our clients is using competencies in the recruitment to hire for culture fit allows you to get around some of the bad connotation around hiring for culture fit, because you're not hiring people like me, but you are looking for key characteristics that are embodied in those behaviors that can really, create that alignment between an organization and an employee's value.
Yeah, well, it really allows you to translate your organization's values into more behavioral, observable terms and make them a bit more tangible. So if you decide not to hire someone because they're not a cultural fit, it's legally defensible because you have actual observable behaviors that you can screen someone in or out based upon.
Absolutely, great. Okay, so our next question is from Chandra. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background first. So Chandra's organization, they have 500 job titles across various business segments in their company. They are competency specialists, worked with various subject matter experts to prepare approximately 300 competency profiles covering those 500 jobs. This can be a bit of a manual process. And the next step in their program is to look at implementing processes for preparing career pathways as well as gap assessments. So Chandra is looking for a little bit of advice on the best way forward.
Okay. So very common sort of process, very common step. So now that the profiles are in place, what's nice is you can start leveraging them for different applications. So in terms of career development, if they do have job family competencies identified, that helps create some career pathways within specific job families. So within, a similar group of jobs, it can help identify, where you would logically move up next or where you would move laterally, and it can help identify some gaps. So for instance, if you want to move up into a leadership position, is there a leadership competency you might need to get? In terms of performance management, there's also the idea of having people self-assess or get feedback on their performance or ability to actually enact those competencies at work. And luckily, I know our software can help with all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, regardless of whether it's our software, of course, we want you to use Competency Core. But when you're looking at implementing these, I think you really need to look for tools to help accelerate these manual processes. Competency Core, the way we're going to be, and this is functionality, that's launching really soon, so stay tuned for those announcements. But we're looking at how to do really accelerating that job matching between when an employee is looking at their career paths. You have your identified competencies that you possess as an individual. How do those match up to jobs? How do those match up to the next step where you need to go, as well as your target role down the road? And using software applications to really help accelerate this process as you move, want to move and develop through your career, and linking that back to competency assessments. And making sure that you can give employees those actionable tools to put those plans in place, as you said, Kelsey, to really address those gaps and move forward. It does remove a lot of those manual processes that are inherent if you're doing it in something like Excel spreadsheets, which we have clients who come to us and that's how they're doing it. And it does make it tedious. It reduces uptake on the programs for sure as well. Yeah. So that's great. So thank you very much, Chandra, for that question. Our next question comes to us from Kenitha. So many organizations today are facing rapid changes and huge transformations due to technological or other business changes going on in the industry. So how can competencies help organizations navigate those changes?
Yeah, so what's nice about competencies is that they sort of help inform what the expectations are for performance. So if you know that your organizational objectives have changed, you can always adapt the competencies that you have in place, or you can choose your competencies that are more focused around adapting. So whether it's adaptability, agility, those types of competencies that you're bringing in people who are used to change. It's also introducing, you can have more technical competencies or have competencies around the ability to take on new forms of software, sort of that continuous learning piece.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. We're actually going to flip to a question that's coming live from the audience instead of the ones that were submitted in advance. So this comes to us from Michelle. Thanks, Michelle, for attending live. So Kelsey, if you are using competencies to measure performance, so within a performance management, performance review process, are behavioral anchors helpful or hurtful, in your opinion?
Definitely much more helpful. A lot of the issues that people tend to have when using performance management is everything is very subjective. So when I'm talking about, hey, Sarah, your planning and organizing is great, well, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? How can we actually provide something a bit more concrete, more observable, more tangible feedback? If your boss were to say to you, I'd really like it if when you were writing the report, you made sure it was error-free and succinct, as opposed to, I'd really appreciate your report to be better written. What does that mean?
Absolutely. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so our next question is from Mustafa. This is probably the most common question that we get ever at HRSG. What is the difference between competencies and skills?
Very common question. So it's a skill, if we want to define it, is really an application of knowledge. What competencies are a collection of knowledge, skills, abilities, personal attributes, motivations, traits, grouped together, and then what sort of separates them is that they are defined in behavioral and observable terms.
Yeah.
So if we want to think of sort of what does that mean, if we talk about the negotiation competency per se, well, you need knowledge of what topic is that you're negotiating about. You need knowledge of what does your party want, what does the other party want. Maybe you need skill in actually leveraging this knowledge to accomplish something, and you also would need the ability to persuade and to communicate with others. So all of these sort of themes rolled up into one would be the competency of negotiation.
Great. And if you want to do any more reading on that, we do have a blog post. We'll get that thrown up in the chat panel, so you can click right through to that. So you can definitely do some more reading on that topic. So our next question comes to us from Cicely. This is a pretty broad question. So what is the smartest way to identify competencies for a company?
Well, the smartest way is to have the right people in the room at the right time. Essentially what that means is having the people who really have knowledge of where the company is going, what are the organizational objectives, to select maybe those organization-wide competencies. If you're looking at more of the job level, having those subject matter experts in the room. You have to have a well-defined job to begin with. Then after that, have people who really understand the job so they can tell you what's most critical for success within that job.
Absolutely. And I mean, in terms of accelerating the process, making sure you have the right tools to help do that, the right starting points. I mean, there's a lot of tools like a competency dictionary, which can make sure you're, not picking stuff at, out at random, I guess, where there's going to be a lot of work to develop those competencies. So having a starting point is probably another good tip, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, you can always partner with a vendor, somebody who already has knowledge of off-the-shelf competencies that might be able to help you pinpoint what you're looking for, define it in terms that are already observable, behavioral, things that already exist, to try to save some of the legwork of developing from scratch.
Absolutely. And, we obviously do this work as well, so. Okay, our next question comes to us from Ranga. So again, this kind of relates back to a couple of the previous questions. So going through, this organization is currently going through the competency profiling process. And it can sometimes be very time consuming for participants. So Ranga is asking, how can I encourage participation of line managers when they seem to be unwilling to participate because they are busy with their daily operations?
Aren't we all?
Yeah.
So there are ways to expedite the process. First and foremost, it's really important to communicate the value of the exercise and the value of competencies, and what does that actually bring to the line managers. So is it going to improve their ability to hire the right people, to manage their employees they currently have? I really communicate that value. In terms of expediting the process, there's different software tools. So a survey that can be dispatched to get buy-in from individuals, so at least the manager has a starting point to go off of. Partnering with a vendor, again, that might be able to help shortlist some competencies or some ideas so that they don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just like in any change management program within an organization, it always comes back to, I really think, the defining the what's in it for me.
Yeah, what's that communication?
What's that, I think when we've looked at some of our projects in terms of the time allocation that you spend on the development versus the communication, I think we often encourage our clients to shift that allocation from being very heavy on the development to allowing for more time around the communication, the implementation, the change management. How is it, how are you going to get your stakeholders engaged?
Exactly, yeah.
So the second part of this question from Ranga, what's the best approach to identifying proficiency levels for competencies?
So I have a good analogy for you. So when you think about creating a competency profile, you can think about creating a recipe. So what is the DNA, what is the recipe for success for this position?
Yeah.
And then when you're thinking about, you have your ingredients, but how much of each of those ingredients do you need to go in? Absolutely. That's really how you kind of go about assigning those proficiency levels. So, I need a lot of planning and organizing, but I may only need a pinch of fostering communication. So how do those levels look, and sort of what's that ratio?
Perfect. Thanks, Kelsey. Okay, our next question here is from Chelly. So there's a bit of background around here as well. So Chelly, thank you very much for your question. As a learning and development lead, I want to bring the value of competencies into my organization. However, the company culture is very client-focused and not too employee-focused. And I'm sure this isn't unique to Kelsey's company. So in the organization, they have actually implemented 4 core competencies that were selected by leadership. So that's a great start. But she's looking to tie competencies into learning journeys.
Okay.
So Kelsey is asking, how do I slowly change the culture so that competencies are seen as a good thing and vital to employee development and hence company growth?
So what is nice about competencies is they explain what you're expected to do.
Yeah.
So knowing what those core competencies are, those are the core values of the organization. They're obviously in place to help foster the culture and help achieve some of those objectives. Having them defined behaviorally means as an employee, I know what's expected of me. So if you're talking about learning journeys, when you start to self-assess or get feedback on your performance, you can start to look at, am I maybe not performing up to my expectations, but they're defined behaviorally, so I know exactly what I should be doing. So it creates a bit more clarity around what you can be doing and how to incorporate that. It's also easy to map resources to competencies. So if there's a gap that is in place, are there certain on-the-job activities, projects, assignments? Are there courses? Can I learn from a mentor or somebody else in the company who's demonstrating one of those competencies really well, and translate it into learning journey that way?
Yeah, great. One of the other things that kind of occurs to me in terms of selling the application of competencies internally, where maybe funds don't want to be allocated, budgets don't want to be allocated to those kinds of projects, using competencies as part of a learning program really can significantly have impact on the return on investment, because you can really make sure that you're training to the appropriate things that are going to have the greatest impact for the organization. So in this case, where they have identified those 4 core competencies, identifying where the deficiencies are around those skills and addressing, tighten up really those budgets and get greater impact.
Yeah,
for
sure.
Okay, so we've got a few more questions coming in from the audience. So there's a question here, Kelsey, that builds on the question about the difference between skills and competencies. So what's the difference then between, we understand what's the difference between skills and competencies now. What's the difference between competencies and values?
So values are typically, you see the posters on the wall. We value accountability. We value governance. But it's never really explained to you what that actually means. So it's nice that you value it. But as an employee, how do I know if I'm embodying the values? How do I know if I'm demonstrating what you're looking for me to demonstrate? When it's defined in terms of a competency, you have those expected behaviors or those expectations. So the organization is telling me to be accountable. If it's defined behaviorally, I'm accountable to submit my time by a certain date. I'm accountable to speak up if I notice somebody doing something unethical, that kind of thing. So it really just defines things in terms of expectations and behaviors.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if I think about how we've implemented core competencies here at HRSG, we have our values, we know what the company values are, and as you've said, those core competencies, it's not that there's a difference between them, but they are there to support and communicate.
Exactly.
The values.
Exactly.
Okay, so this one comes from Angelica. How can you make sure a competency-based development culture based on continuous feedback? So, I mean, I think a lot of this is in the context of people are really switching performance, those annual performance management systems to a more continuous feedback aligned with development. So do you have any strategies or tips for encouraging this kind of an approach?
Absolutely. So like I said, competencies help define expectations. And what's nice about implementing competencies is you now have a common language. So like I said, when I'm talking about planning and organizing, Sarah's talking about planning and organizing, we're talking about the same thing. So when I'm giving feedback to Sarah, instead of saying, hey, great, planning and organizing, I can make it much more specific and really align it to some of those expectations for the job, or to align it to a competency. Say, I'm going to give you creativity and innovation thumbs up, and really try to be specific about it.
That's great. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us live today, who submitted questions in advance. We really, really appreciate all your support. We will be back next month, May 24th, with Suzanne Simpson. We are switching up our format just a little bit. Next month's session is really just going to focus specifically around the topic of using competencies in career development, building out those, learning and development or career pathing programs all around competencies. So we look forward to getting all of your questions on that topic, and we will see you back again next month. Thank you very much. And Kelsey, thank you for all of your knowledge that you were able to share with everybody today.
Anytime.
See you later.